December 15, 1944, near the Rhine River in western Germany. In the freezing mud of a shattered forest, Anna clutched her uniform against the biting wind, her mind racing with the stories she'd heard for years about American soldiers. Brutal men who would drag women like her into chains and worse. But as the jeep's headlights cut through the dusk, a young sergeant stepped out, his face calm under the helmet, and instead of barking orders, he held out a wool blanket, still warm from the truck. What happened next would slowly unravel the world she thought she knew, piece by fragile piece. The shelling had finally stopped, leaving only the echo of distant booms and the crunch of boots on frozen ground. Anna, a 22-year-old telephone operator from a small Bavarian town, had joined the Helferinnen, young women serving as aides in the German military, just 2 years earlier, full of the fire from Hitler youth rallies that promised glory and purity for the Reich. Now, with her unit scattered after the failed Ardennes push, she knelt in the underbrush, hands trembling as U.S. troops fanned out, their rifles lowered but ready. She expected shouts, rough hands yanking her up, maybe even the end of everything right there in the cold. The propaganda reels back home had painted the Americans as gangsters in uniform, soft-living cowards who hid behind machines and treated captives with savage glee. Anna's heart hammered. She'd heard whispers from the Eastern Front about what soldiers did to women when they won, and the thought made her stomach twist. The sergeant approached slowly, his breath fogging in the chill air. "Fraulein, it's over. Come with us," he said in halting German, his voice steady but not harsh. No cuffs clicked around her wrists. Instead, he draped the blanket over her shoulders, the wool thick and soft, smelling faintly of machine oil and something clean from far away. Anna flinched at first, pulling back as if it were a trick, but the warmth seeped in, chasing away the numbness in her fingers. Around her, other women from the signals unit, Liesel with her bandaged arm, Greta still clutching a shattered radio, stood up one by one, their faces pale masks of shock. By late 1944, the Allies had pushed across France for every drop. In truth, the U.S. Army's logistics were a marvel. They produced more than 300,000 trucks a year, fueled by an industrial giant that churned out fuel and food while the Reich starved under Allied bombs. Anna stared at the passing trees, the first flakes of snow dusting the windshield. What kind of enemy shared warmth instead of taking it away? She hugged the blanket closer, a small comfort that felt like a question she wasn't ready to answer. As the convoy rumbled south toward the rear lines, Anna's mind wandered to the life she'd left behind, the tidy village streets, her mother's letters full of pride for her service, the rallies where everyone sang of inevitable victory. But doubt crept in now, unbidden, like the cold that the blanket held at bay. The truck jolted over a rut, and Liesel leaned close, whispering, "They didn't hurt us. Why?" Anna had no words yet, only the growing sense that the stories she'd believed were cracking at the edges. Hours stretched on, the night deepening, until the lights of a temporary holding area flickered ahead, the first step into a captivity she could never have imagined. The truck rumbled through snow-dusted roads, carrying Anna and her comrades into unknown territory, the engine's steady growl a far cry from the sputtering coughs of their own stalled vehicles back at the front. Darkness pressed in as they left the Rhine behind, the convoy snaking through checkpoints where more American soldiers waved them on with flashlights, their faces lit in brief, impersonal glows. Anna sat rigid on the bench, the blanket still wrapped around her like a shield, watching the world outside blur into shadows of bombed-out villages and endless supply lines stretching back into the night. No one spoke much at first. The women exchanged wary glances, their breaths sinking with the jolts over potholes, each bump a reminder of how far they were falling from the Reich's grasp. One of the guards, a lanky private from Ohio with a faint southern drawl, lit a cigarette and offered the pack around without a smirk or demand. "Smoke if you want," he said simply, passing it to Liesel first. She hesitated, then took one, the flame of his lighter trembling slightly in the wind that whipped an industrial machine that churned out vehicles while Germany rationed every drop of gasoline to the brink of collapse. The private pulled a candy bar from his pocket, Hershey's, wrapped in foil that crinkled like forbidden treasure, and broke it into pieces, handing one to each woman. "Better than rations, huh?" he grinned, popping his share without waiting for thanks. Anna stared at the chocolate in her palm, the sweetness melting slowly on her tongue as she bit in, a flavor richer than anything she'd tasted since before the shortages hit home. Back in Bavaria, families scavenged for ersatz coffee and watery soup. Here, this small bar hinted at a land of plenty, where food came not from sacrifice, but from factories that never stopped. It cracked something in her, a tiny fracture in the wall of beliefs built on tales of a decadent West too weak to fight. Why waste such things on captives? The question lingered as the convoy pushed on, past more depots where mechanics swarmed over engines with tools that gleamed, no hint of the desperation that had grounded so many Luftwaffe planes. Allied logistics on the Western Front in late 1944 gave them the edge, moving supplies faster than the Axis could dream, with truck fleets that outran any fuel-starved counterattack. Liesel leaned over during a brief stop for water, her voice a whisper. "They treat us like guests, not prisoners. What if the stories were all wrong?" Anna nodded faintly, the chocolate's warmth spreading oddly in her chest, mixing with the chill of doubt. The truck lurched forward again, crossing into safer lines where the air felt less heavy with smoke. Hours blurred into the pre-dawn hush, the women's exhaustion pulling them into fitful dozes against each other's shoulders. By morning, the landscape had shifted. No more shattered spires, just open fields under a pale sky. And rumors rippled through the cab. They were heading across the ocean, to camps in America itself. Anna's mind reeled at the thought, the vastness of it all pressing like the weight of the unknown. As the first rays hit the horizon, the convoy merged onto a larger road, bound for ports where ships waited to carry them far from the ruins. Hours later, after a hurried rail transfer that surprised the rough shove or barked command that the stories always promised. But the line moved steadily, no chaos, no cruelty, just quiet efficiency under the wide blue sky. They filed into a long, open building that smelled of fresh paint and pine, the first stop in what the Americans called processing. A woman in uniform, part of the Women's Army Corps, as the patch on her sleeve read, stood at a table with clipboards and translators, her voice even as she asked for names and ranks in careful German. Anna stepped forward, her throat dry, handing over her papers without a word. No slaps across the face, no stripping of badges in humiliation like the officers back home might do to deserters. Instead, the woman nodded, jotting notes, and passed her a numbered tag. "This way for delousing," she said, pointing to a row of showers behind canvas screens. The other women murmured, eyes wide. They'd heard of camps where captives were hosed down like animals, but here it felt almost routine, like checking into a distant relative's home. Undressing in the tiled room, Anna shivered not just from the air, but from the vulnerability, her hands covering herself as water steamed from the nozzles. Then came the bar of soap, white and smooth, not the gritty wartime mix of ashes and lies they'd scraped by with for months. It lathered easily, carrying a faint scent of lavender that stung her eyes with unexpected tears. Greta, next to her, held hers close, whispering, "Real soap? How?" As they rinsed and dried, clean towels were handed out, followed by folded bundles of clothes, simple cotton dresses and underthings, starched and new. nothing like the threadbare uniforms they'd worn. The Geneva Convention, which the Americans followed strictly, required such treatment for all prisoners, ensuring women like Anna got separate quarters and medical care away from the men. By 1945, U.S. camps held about 425,000 German prisoners across 700 sites, with female auxiliaries like the Helferinnen kept in their own compounds to maintain order and dignity. Dressed and herded to a mess area, Anna sat at a long table where trays slid past, lined up under electric bulbs that hummed softly overhead. Anna claimed a lower bunk, unfolding the blanket across the thin mattress, while Liesel and Greta settled nearby. Whispers started in the dimming light, tales of what came next, work details in the fields, classes on American ways, routines that sounded impossibly normal for a prison. Anna lay back, staring at the ceiling, the day's strangeness settling like dust. The world outside those fences felt vast and unforgiving, yet inside, a fragile calm took hold, pulling her toward questions she'd long buried. Mornings brought not roll calls of terror, but the smell of coffee wafting from the kitchen, strong and dark like nothing Anna had tasted since her grandmother's farm before the war. The bugle sounded at 6 sharp, pulling the women from their cots in the barracks, where electric lights had glowed steadily through the night, chasing shadows that once hid nightmares back home. Anna rubbed her eyes, swinging her legs over the edge, the wooden floor cool under her feet as she joined the line for the washroom. Hot water poured from faucets that turned with a simple twist, no buckets hauled from icy streams, no waiting for rations of what passed for soap in the Reich's last days. It felt wrong, this ease, like stealing from the struggle they'd all endured. Breakfast followed in the mess hall, trays clattering as cooks ladled out oatmeal thick with milk, slices of bread slathered in jam from American orchards, and that coffee steaming in tin mugs. Anna sipped hers slowly, the bitterness cutting through the fog of sleep, watching Greta stack her spoon neatly after just a few bites. "Too much," Greta muttered, eyes darting to the waste bin where extras went uneaten. But hunger won out for most. The portions added up to about 3,000 calories a day, more than what civilians scraped together in bombed-out Berlin, where bread lines stretched for hours under rubbled skies. U.S. camps like Hereford followed rules set by the Geneva Convention, ensuring prisoners got fair food and rest, with female auxiliaries like Anna assigned lighter duties to match their roles back in the war. She chewed thoughtfully, the jam's sweetness a quiet rebellion against memories of any job in their vast country. By 1945, over 10,000 German women prisoners worked in such camps across the U.S., their labor helping farms and factories while earning small credits for Red Cross parcels that arrived monthly with treats like canned fruit. Anna plunged her hands into the soapy water, watching suds rise like forgotten dreams, the bar of soap slipping smooth between her fingers. It cleaned the cloth easily, but her mind felt grimy still, tangled with questions about the world that provided such things freely. Why build machines to wash clothes when the Reich preached hardship as virtue? The doubt itched, a small break in the armor of ideals she'd worn so long, making her glance away when a guard nodded approval. Evenings brought medical checks in a clinic that smelled of antiseptic, where a nurse bandaged minor cuts without prying questions, her hands gentle on Anna's arm. No rough probes or punishments for imagined ills, just care that made the body heal while the spirit twisted in confusion. Yet, beneath the comfort, old fears lingered from stories of the Eastern Front, whispers of horrors that had crossed even to their signals unit, pulling Anna into quiet talks with the others after lights out. Letters from Germany arrived one afternoon, painting pictures of famine and collapse back home, their ink smudged like the lives they described. Anna sat on her bunk in the barracks, unfolding the thin paper with hands that still smelled of laundry soap, her eyes scanning her mother's shaky script about empty markets and sirens that never stopped. The words hit hard, ration cards worthless now, families sharing one potato across the table, the sky forever gray from smoke. Back in Bavaria, before the enlistment, Anna had marched in Hitler Youth parades, her uniform crisp and her heart full of the leader's promises. A strong Reich where every child would thrive under the swastika's shadow. Those rallies filled her with fire, teaching songs of purity and victory, shaping her young mind to see the world in black and white, enemies as weak and deserving defeat. By early 1945, the Nazi indoctrination had reached millions, with over 8 million youth in the Hitler Youth and its Girls' League, drilling them daily in loyalty to the Führer and hatred for the so-called decadent West. She folded the rations for civilians plummeted to as low as 1,000 calories a day, barely enough to keep the body moving, let alone the spirit. The Reich's economy, strained by years of war and blockade, left shelves bare and bellies hollow, a far cry from the propaganda posters of bountiful harvests under Nazi rule. Anna traced her mother's face in the photo, the contrast gnawing at her. Here, electric lights burned without fear of raids, while back home, nights hid in cellars from the roar overhead. The other women gathered in small groups that evening, sharing their own scraps of news, sisters lost in the blasts, villages erased overnight, the endless lines for bread that turned to sawdust in the mouth. Anna listened, her voice joining the murmurs, recalling the pride she'd felt signing up for the Helferinnen, believing it all part of a grand destiny. But the letters stripped that away, layer by layer, revealing the fragility beneath. She slipped the photo under her pillow, its edges curling like her fading certainties, and lay back, staring at the ceiling. The camp's routines, once strange, now underscored the home she'd known as illusion, strong on the outside, crumbling within. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the Texas plains, a guard's casual kindness, a shared apple from his lunch, offered with a simple nod, reopened wounds she thought buried, pulling her toward conversations that would challenge everything deeper still. The American sergeant spoke softly one evening, asking about her village instead of interrogating her, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he leaned against the barracks fence. Anna paused in folding laundry, the Texas dusk painting the sky in soft oranges, surprised by the question that came without the edge of accusation she'd braced for from every uniform. "Bavaria," she replied hesitantly. "Near Munich, with hills and old stone houses." He nodded, sharing a bite of his apple, crisp and red from some orchard out west, and for a moment the barbed wire faded, replaced by talk of lost homes on both sides. No demands for secrets, no threats, just a man named Tom. Crowds, simple talks on voting and free speech, with translators making the ideas plain. No drills, just open discussion where questions flowed without fear of the Gestapo's knock. By the program's end, surveys showed that about 90% of returning German POWs had shifted views, rejecting Nazism's hold, influenced more by daily witness to American fairness than any forced lesson. Anna found herself listening during one such session, held in a cleared yard under strung lights, as a professor explained elections like neighborhood choices, not iron-fisted decrees. The words stirred old rallies in her mind, the chants that once filled her with pride, now echoing hollow against this quiet reason. Tom noticed her frown, and later offered a worn book from his pocket, Thomas Mann's Stories, smuggled past the Reich's censors, saying, "Read this when you're ready. It might make sense of things. She took it that night, fingers tracing the cover, the act shaking the hatred she'd nursed like a duty. Why give such freedom to captives when her leaders had burned books for less? The pages opened worlds of doubt, words that whispered of lives beyond the Führer's shadow, cracking the shell of beliefs that had armored her heart. Liesel joined her the next day, borrowing the book with wide eyes, and soon small groups formed in the barracks, sharing passages under flashlight glow. The guards encouraged it, no searches or snatches, treating ideas like the coffee they poured freely. Trust grew in those exchanges, fragile but real, turning strangers into echoes of shared humanity. Anna's laughter came easier now, though shadows lingered in her gaze when talk turned to the war's toll. But not all encounters were gentle. Memories of implied Eastern horrors surfaced in nightmares, pulling her from sleep with cries that echoed through the quiet nights, leading to deeper shifts in the days ahead. Nights in the bunk, Anna stared at the ceiling. The electric bulbs hummed, the only sound breaking the quiet, as questions about the broadcasts she'd trusted for years swirled like smoke in her mind. The radio voices back home had painted the Allies as monsters, scheming destroyers of everything pure. Yet here in the camp, mail arrived weekly without censorship, letters from families slipping under her door, just the day's dust, but the deeper stains of beliefs that now felt like grime. The soap lathered clean, but her thoughts tangled, replaying the rallies where crowds cheered for a Reich unbeatable, only to clash against the guards' easy kindness and the abundance that mocked every scarcity tale. Captivity's psychological toll hit hard for many like her, fostering a culture shock that unraveled years of indoctrination, leaving a hollow ache where pride once stood. Post-war testimonies from Helferinnen often spoke of this disorientation, women describing a profound shift as American fairness exposed the fragility of Nazi myths, turning fear into quiet questioning. By 1945, around 70% of German POWs in U.S. camps showed signs of ideological change through such daily exposures, their views softening not from lectures alone, but from the human connections that defied the broadcast's venom. She lay awake longer those nights, the blanket's warmth a reminder of the capture that started it all, pulling her into internal debates that left her exhausted by dawn. Why had the Führer's words promised glory, while this place offered choices, even in captivity? The mail's honesty, the unguarded talks, they chipped away, revealing a world where enemies shared stories instead of hatred. Anna turned on her side, the photo from home pressed under her pillow, its faces blurring in her mind like the line between truth and the tales she'd lived by. As spring neared, warming the Texas air with hints of green, a group discussion in the barracks yard revealed shared doubts among the captives, drawing her into words that would bind them closer still. In the quiet of the laundry room, where steam rose like shared secrets from the tubs, Anna and the others began to speak of what they'd lost and gained, their voices low against the slosh of water and snap of wet cloth on lines. Spring had softened the Texas winds, carrying pollen through open windows as the women gathered after shifts, fingers red from scrubbing, but hearts opening in ways the war had long sealed. Anna shared first, her words halting about the signals unit's frantic days near the Rhine, then listening as Liesel described the long marches where rumors from the east clung like mud, tales of advances that left women duty, their roles as aides and operators a way to support the front without crossing into the men's world of fire. Over 500,000 German women served in such Wehrmacht auxiliaries by war's end, handling signals, anti-aircraft spotting, and admin tasks that kept the machine grinding, often in uniforms that hid their youth under skirts and caps. Captured ones like them numbered around 10,000 by Allied forces, scattered into camps where isolation bred this quiet solidarity, turning strangers into sisters who pieced together the fragments of their pasts. In those hours, They traded stories of enlistment, pride from the League of German Girls, the songs that promised a pure future, now softened by the camp's routines, where doubt wove through the laughter like a hidden seam. Anna watched as one mended a tear in her own dress, the needle pulling fabric tight, a symbol of the fragile recovery taking shape amid the steam and shared glances. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but understanding, the kind that came from voices admitting the broadcast's lies without shame. Greta spoke next, her whisper about a friend's silence after Eastern postings, the way she'd stared at walls for days, avoiding touches that once felt safe. The room grew still, hands pausing, the air thick with what wasn't said, the rumors of horrors that propaganda whispered only about the enemy, now mirrored in their own fears. Yet in that hush, they leaned closer, passing the thread like a lifeline, building strength from the wreckage. Liesel squeezed Anna's shoulder, a touch that lingered without recoil, and for the first time, the weight of isolation lifted, replaced by the warmth of voices weaving a new cloth from old threads. These talks deepened as weeks passed, the women's circle growing, until one evening by the yard fire, a story from a newcomer peeled back layers Anna hadn't touched, pushing her toward a reckoning that shook the foundations deeper still. A faded newspaper clipping from the camp library showed the Reich's final days crumbling, its edges yellowed like the promises that had built it, drawing Anna's eyes to photos of rubble-strewn streets and faces hollow with defeat. She sat at the wooden table one afternoon, the room quiet save for the flip of pages from other women, her fingers tracing headlines about the Führer's bunker, the regime's crimes through atrocity films that shocked even the hardened. In camps like Hereford, questionnaires sifted through pasts, categorizing from major offenders to mere followers, while lectures and newsreels chipped at the Nazi veil, part of a program that detained over 400,000 Germans by 1950 to root out the ideology. Nuremberg Trials began in November 1945, prosecuting 24 top Nazis for war crimes and crimes against humanity, with evidence like camp footage shown to the world and to prisoners like Anna, who watched in stunned silence during mandatory viewings. Over 90,000 Nazis remained in detention by early 1947, their fates sealed by testimonies that revealed the scale, turning doubt into dawning shame. Anna crumpled the clipping, her breath catching as tears welled, not for the leaders, but for the blindness she'd shared, the pride in a uniform now stained by what it hid. Across the table, a chocolate bar from the day's ration sat half-eaten, its sweetness bitter now, highlighting the irony of America's abundance amid her homeland's agony, where families starved while the Reich's machines ground on. The plenty here, once a puzzle, now mocked the scarcity it had caused, a bite that stuck like accusation. She wiped her eyes, the relief fragile, laced with sorrow for the years wasted on lies. The weight of it all built toward an unavoidable truth. One rainy afternoon in the barracks, where Anna stood before a mirror, seeing not the girl from Bavaria, but a stranger whose world had shattered beyond repair. On a rainy afternoon, Anna stood before a mirror in the barracks, rain pattering against the tin roof like insistent questions, seeing not the proud Helferinnen who'd marched for the Reich, but a stranger with shadowed eyes and trembling lips. The fever had come swiftly that morning, a chill from the fields turning to shivers that left her curled on her bunk, the women's talk around her a distant hum as she battled the haze. Tom the sergeant noticed during rounds, his boots pausing outside her door, and instead of protocol, he fetched an extra blanket from the supply shed, thick and fresh, layered over the one from her capture, tucking it gently without a word of pity or probe. His hand brushed her shoulder in the motion, exposing the camp's horrors that her signals had unwittingly supported. Cumulative exposures like these, from re-education films to daily fairness, broke down the barriers for many, with surveys after the war showing about 70% of German POWs in U.S. camps had rejected Nazi ideology by 1945's end. Their views transformed by the human reality beyond the propaganda. Anna's mind reeled, the blanket's warmth now a symbol not of shock, but of rebirth, wrapping the fragments of her old self as the Reich's grand lies dissolved like mist in the sun. She sat up slowly as the fever eased, tears tracing paths down her cheeks, the mirror reflecting a face unmasked, no uniform to hide behind, just the raw ache of awakening. Guilt twisted with clarity, the pride she'd felt in relaying orders now sour against the lives those lines had touched, while Tom's simple act reminded her that enemies carried the same fragile hopes. The weight lifted in sobs that Liesel and Greta met with quiet arms. No judgment, just the bond of women remade in captivity's forge. In that unraveling, Anna glimpsed a new path, not the glory of battle, but the quiet strength of truth, pulling her from the abyss toward the release that waited beyond the fences. As victory bells echoed faintly from the camp radio in the weeks that followed, Anna prepared for a world remade, her steps lighter with the clarity of one who had lost everything to find herself. As victory bells echoed faintly from the radio, marking the war's end in May 1945, Anna prepared for a world remade, folding the few letters and photos that had become her anchors in the barracks. The camp buzzed with announcements of releases, papers shuffling through hands as translators explained the paths home, ships from East Coast ports, trains across a Europe redrawn in ink and fire. Anna stood in line for processing, her name called with the others, receiving a small kit, soap, a comb, and stamps for the journey, symbols of a life resuming beyond the wire. The women's talks turned to futures, voices laced with nerves and hope, planning reunions with families scattered by bombs and borders. The Helferinnen's shared service, now a bond stronger than spent in blind service. Had the Reich stolen her youth, or had captivity gifted her sight? The question hung as she walked the yard one last time, the Texas sun warm on her face, a world away from the Rhine's chill. Clarity settled in the final days like dust after a storm, the doubts giving way to a steady resolve, as Anna joined the convoy to the railhead, eyes forward toward the ship that would carry her home. She thought of the sergeant's kindness, the women's whispers, the truths that had unraveled the lies, lessons not of defeat, but of the human spark that outlasted any flag. Anna stepped onto the ship home in late summer 1945, the blanket folded under her arm, a reminder that humanity often hides behind uniforms, waiting to surprise us. In the end, the war's true casualty was the lies that divided them. If stories like Anna's spark your curiosity about history's hidden turns, consider subscribing for more tales from the front lines.